I'm going to convince you why you don't hate the government enough, because last year companies spent $4 billion to influence the government's decisions. And that's not the best part. The best part is nobody's going to do anything about this corruption because not only is it legal, it's protected by the Constitution. Today we're talking about professional pestering, strategic schmoozing, or dare I say, capital cajoling. You probably know it as lobbying. Now, whenever you hear the word lobbyist, you probably picture a guy in a $3,000 suit smoking a cigar that costs more than your car payment, handing a senator a briefcase full of non-sequential bills in a dark alley behind Applebee's. Or Popeyes if you're Kamala Harris. I'm just kidding. It'd be a KFC. Now, while that idea would make a great movie, the reality is actually way worse. Because the guy in the alley, he's actually committing a crime. But the reality of modern lobbying is that it happens in broad daylight, it's fully documented, and it's technically exactly what the founding fathers wanted. To understand how we got to a point where corporations can write their own safety regulations, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back before the super PACs, before the private jets, before congressmen decided to retire to become consultants for the companies they used to regulate. See, this idea goes all the way back to 1215 with English common law and the Magna Carta. You see, back then the logic was simple. If you're a king and your peasants are angry, hungry, or bored, they tend to get a little restless. And when they're restless, rebellions start to happen, and rebellions are expensive. And they usually end up with someone's head on a spike, and not so uncommonly, it was the king's head themselves.
I've made a huge mistake.
So to keep this from happening, rulers decided to let the peasants petition the crown. And this sort of acted as a pressure relief valve for them. Let me explain. Imagine you're in class and you sit down and the teacher hands out the test. You feel like you're ready for this test, you study for 2 weeks, you're gonna nail it. You open the test, lo and behold, you have never seen any of this stuff before in your life. None of the stuff that was on the study guide she gave you is on it. But you just have to suck it up and do your best. So that's what you do. You take it, you hand it in, and you get your score back. And let's just say it's less than favorable. Now you want to go and you want to rip your teacher's head off. You want to tell her why this is the stupidest thing under the sun. But your teacher has a strict no feedback policy, so you just have to sit there and take it. Now you can imagine that after a certain amount of time, and the fact that this isn't just happening to you, it's happening to everyone else in the class, you all are going to collectively decide to go kick that teacher's door down and make her listen to you. But if instead she allowed for feedback, you could at least go up to her after the test and explain to her why it's so dumb. And now the ball's in her court whether she's going to make a change or not. But at least at this point, you expressed yourself and you feel heard. Now let's jump back to 1215 and imagine those students are peasants and that teacher is the king. Instead of the students complaining about their test, it's the peasants complaining about their taxes. And instead of the teacher not listening, it's the king not listening. And what do you think's gonna happen if that happens enough?
That ominous glow in the distance.
And you're right, his head is gonna end up on top of a spear at some point. So imagine you're the king, you let the peasants come in, complain about their taxes, maybe fix a pothole or two. You don't have to make any meaningful change. But at least your peasants feel heard at this point. Now fast forward to the American colonies. The founding fathers were obsessed with this idea. In fact, the American Revolution wasn't really a rejection of the king, at least not at first. It was more a reaction to the king, sending all of our calls to voicemail.
Tony, we have a problem.
Please hold.
No, don't.
To show you what I mean, in 1775, the Continental Congress sent the Olive Branch petition. And this petition basically said, hey, King George, we're cool with you and all, but it'd be nice if you stopped taxing our tea and letting your soldiers bum off our shit.
Oh, that's a big boy, isn't he?
And King George, he didn't even read it. And this was a breaking point for a lot of the founding fathers. They realized that if your government doesn't listen to you, the only option left is to make them listen. So when they wrote the Constitution, they made sure to incorporate this idea. And they did that through the First Amendment. The one that everyone supposedly knows, but no one's actually read.
Did he teach you a lesson?
Yeah, and the lesson is that the First Amendment doesn't give you the right to be a fucking asshole.
Despite this, most of you know that it guarantees the right of speech, freedom, press, and assembly. But you probably forgot about the little one at the end. The right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And the idea was simple. If the government does something stupid, which let's be honest is their default setting, you, the citizen, have the right to go to them and tell them why it's stupid. So if all of a sudden the government decides to slap a tax on whiskey, which makes it more expensive for Farmer John over here to get his fix after working in the field all day, you better be damn sure he has the right to go to the government and tell them why that's the stupidest thing he's ever heard. Because what else is he supposed to do? Go home and spend time with Martha and the 17 kids without getting wasted? But that right there is lobbying. The process of Farmer John going to Congress and expressing his grievances and petitioning them to change the law. And for a while, this system kind of worked. In the early 1800s, there were no lobbying firms, there were no guys in $5,000 suits. It was just a bunch of dudes. Veterans who wanted their pensions, farmers who wanted a tariff on imported wool, and the name lobbyist came from the fact that these guys would literally sit in the lobby of the House of Representatives and wait for them to walk out of the chambers to catch them and tell them about the problems they had. Because back then there weren't any phones. You couldn't go to Twitter and just start bitching about whatever. If you wanted to make a change, you had to go be the one to make that change. You had to go look someone in the eye and ask them for help.
Help me! Help me!
And by 1817, the newspapers started calling these people lobby members. It wasn't a secret, it wasn't sinister, it was just how you got things done. It was a system based on access. If you could get to DC, you had a voice. And sure, it helped if you were a wealthy merchant, but it's not like you needed $1 million from some super PAC to do it. All you needed was a horse and a grievance. But then something changed, and the government started spending real money. And when the government starts writing big fat checks, the sharks start circling. Because right around the corner was the biggest, baddest, most expensive technology the world had ever seen, the railroads. And this revealed one small problem with the right to petition, and it's that it assumed everyone spoke at roughly the same volume. It assumed that when Farmer John complained about his property tax, it was at the same volume as when the railroad tycoon over here complains about their property tax. Obviously that's not the case, and what's more is that it doesn't say anything about having other people doing the petitioning for you. And that brings us to the first time America really looked at this system and realized something might be terribly wrong. So we have this nice system. Farmer John talks to Congress, Congress fixes the whiskey tax, Farmer John gets shit-faced, everyone goes home happy. But then the railroads appeared. In the 1860s, the United States decided it wanted to be connected from sea to shining sea, because this is America, and when we do something, we do it big. Enter the Union Pacific Railroad. These guys got the contract, but they also got a massive problem. You see, building a railroad across a continent is expensive, dangerous, and contrary to what you might think, not a super strong business model if you actually want to make money. But the executives at Union Pacific, now, they were innovators. They realized that the money wasn't in operating the railroad, but in the construction of it. So they came up with a little plan I like to call the infinite money glitch of 1864. They created a separate construction company called Credit Mobilier something of America. Now, that sounds like a fancy French bank, but I assure you it wasn't. It was a fake company owned by, get this, the exact same guys who own Union Pacific, to which Union Pacific then hired as independent contractors for the actual construction of the railroad. Let me walk you through how this went down. Hey, Mr. Construction Company person who I've totally never seen before in my life. How much is it going to cost you to build 1 mile of track? Oh, well, hello, Mr. Union Pacific person, whom I've also totally never met before in my life. That'll cost about, $60,000 per mile. Wow, that's pretty steep. But I guess that'll work. I'll go talk to the government. Well, hello, Mr. Government Man. I'm going to need $60,000 per mile of track. Wow, that's a lot of money. I'm not sure the taxpayers are going to be happy about that. All right, Mr. Construction Company person, how's that railway going? Actually, it only costs about $30,000 per mile of track. Huh. Maybe we should give the government back that extra money. That's a good one. Could you imagine? How about you just take that extra money and distribute it amongst the shareholders? Ladies and gentlemen, if you aren't picking up what I'm putting down, basically what was going on is the US government took a metric fuck ton of government bonds and land grants and handed them to Union Pacific, to which Union Pacific then hired a separate construction company called Credit Mobilier, who then overinflated the fuck out of the construction cost But Union Pacific was more than happy to pay it because the government just gave them all this money. And not only that, but then Credit Mobilier took it and distributed it amongst its shareholders. And would you look at that? They just so happen to be the same shareholders as Union Pacific. And this is absolutely crazy. This is like charging the government for a pristine Wagyu steak. But instead, you just walk out and you serve them a big, hot, steaming fat pile of shit. And then you keep the change.
That is one big pile of shit.
Which, by the way, was to the tune of about $20 million. And that's in 1860s money. In today's dollars, that equates to about... carry the one... a metric fuck ton of money. Now you're probably asking yourself, wouldn't Congress notice if they were getting billed double for what the actual cost of the railroad was going to be? Why, yes. Yes, they would. Which is why the railroad didn't just bribe Congress. They let them in on the deal. Meet Oaks Ames. Oaks Ames was both a congressman and a major shareholder in Union Pacific because apparently the term conflict of interest hadn't been invented yet. I mean, it's still pretty arbitrary today, but that's neither here nor there. Now, while he was busy serving the people, he started handing out shares of Credit Mobilier stock to his fellow congressmen. He gave shares to the Speaker of the House. He gave shares to the Senate Finance Chairman. He gave shares to the Vice President of the United States. But if he was going to bribe them, why didn't he just hand them fistfuls of cash instead? It's because this way, he gave them equity. Do you see the genius in that? If you hand someone a fistful of cash, they're going to take that and spend it. But if you give him stock in your company, now you're on the same team. Suddenly the vice president doesn't care if the railroad is overcharging the government. In fact, he wants them to overcharge the government because the more money the railroad charges, the more money they get, the higher their stock price goes, and the richer he gets. To show how blatantly bad this got, Ames literally wrote to his friend saying that he placed the stock where it would, quote, do the most good, which is 1860s slang for I just bribed the chairman for the Committee on Railroads and we're gonna be Scrooge McDuck rich.
I gotta do it, man.
And this went on for years until the New York Sun finally broke it in 1872. And it was huge. It was called the King of Frauds, and the public was furious. Investigations were launched, and the result? A couple of guys got censured, which is basically a formal slap on the wrist, but hardly anyone went to jail. Why? Because technically, there were no laws against it. The system had no way to punish what everyone knew was wrong because no one had thought to make a law that said, hey, maybe don't own the company that you're regulating. Now you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, okay, that's messed up, but isn't this video about lobbying? That just sounds like fraud. And what I'd tell you, dear viewer, is that what Ames was doing was technically lobbying. If the definition of lobbying is an organized effort to influence government decisions, then I'd say that handing the Vice President of the United States secret stock options is definitely influencing government decisions. Before this, lobbying was reactive. It was Farmer John saying, hey, this tax hurts me. But now, the railroads realized this thinking was too small. They realized that you shouldn't wait for the government to mess up. You should proactively help them to write the laws. It's like playing Call of Duty, but instead of getting good at aiming, you just pay the developers to give you double health and make it so nobody else spawns with a gun. See, it's not cheating if it's a feature. And that set the precedent for the next 100 years of American industry. If you want to make boatloads of money, don't just build the business, build the law. Once the railroads proved that buying laws was a viable business strategy, the floodgates opened. It wasn't just trains anymore. It was steel, it was oil, it was banking, it was sugar. It was all these large industries. So by the late 1800s, lobbying stopped being a side hustle and it became an industry. Corporations stopped sending random guys to go stand in the lobby, and they started hiring permanent staff for this purpose. They hired former congressmen, former clerks, expensive lawyers, people who knew exactly how a bill becomes a law, and more importantly, how to get a bill killed in committee before anyone even reads it. But they had a branding problem because lobbyists started to sound dirty. It sounded like bribe giver. So they rebranded. They were parliamentary agents, legislative counsel, government relations experts. But it's all the same, just with a different name. It's like when Twitter changed its name to X. You can call it whatever you want and put a new logo on it, but it's still just a place people go to watch car crashes. Now the government did try to stop this, but every time they tried, the money would just put on a different disguise and walk back in through the side door.
Bonnie, how do you keep getting back in?
I'm a drunk. I don't know nothing about how I do anything. Whoa!
Take the Tillman Act of 1907, for example. This was a huge deal as it explicitly banned companies from directly donating to federal candidates. And on paper, this looked like an amazing idea. No more corporate influence, right? Well, that's not exactly how it turned out. You see, the law said that companies couldn't donate directly to candidates, but it didn't say anything about the people who owned the companies. So let's say I'm a wealthy business owner and I want to help out my buddy Senator Bob, because if he gets in office, I might just so happen to get a pretty huge tax break. But to help him do this, I can't just give him a bunch of money from my company because now that's illegal. But I just so happen to have a pretty good cash reserve of my own, so I'm gonna give him a bunch of that. And would you look at that, it just so happens that the day after I gave him all that money, I got a bonus check for that exact amount. And it's legal.
Really?
As you can imagine, this didn't work out exactly how Congress intended it to. So in 1946, they tried again. They passed the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act. And this law said, okay, we can't stop these lobbyists, but what we can do is make them wear a name tag so we know who they are and what they're doing. It required anyone whose principal purpose was lobbying to register and report their spending. Now you probably realize that the term principal purpose is a little ambiguous. And you'd be right, because lawyers capitalized on this, and what they would do is they would say that, well, they're not a lobbyist. Their principal purpose is being a lawyer. They just so happened to sit down and talk with this senator for 10 minutes over lunch, but they never asked for a specific vote on anything, so they don't have to register. Because technically, they're not a lobbyist, they're still just a lawyer.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
Yeah, that is BS. But unfortunately for us, in 1954, after United States v. Harris, the Supreme Court ruled that this law only applies to people who are paid specifically to lobby and have direct contact with Congress. So if you were a strategic consultant who just advised on strategy, but you never officially asked a congressman for a vote on anything, you didn't have to register. So on paper, you're invisible. Now, lobbying continued to evolve, but the biggest change wasn't about who they were lobbying. It's about where the power was moving. Because while everyone was paying attention to Congress, the real power was packing its bags and moving down Capitol Hill to a couple of office buildings that no one was paying attention to. Now, going back a little bit, in the 1930s, FDR launched the New Deal, and to manage this, the government created an alphabet soup of agencies. Things like the FCC, the SEC, the BPA, the CAA, the ECC, the CWA, the DRS, the DSH, the EBA, the FAP, the FCC, the FDIC, USHA, USMC, WPA. I could go on. So suddenly Congress wasn't the only boss in town. In fact, they weren't really even the most important ones anymore. And why is that? Now I'll let you in on a dirty little secret of Washington. Congress is lazy.
I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
Peter, would you be a good sport and indulge us and just tell us a little more?
They're lazy because they pass laws with nice names like the Clean Water Act or the Safe Skies Act. But in fact, Congress doesn't have much of an idea how to actually make the water clean or how to actually keep the skies safe. They're politicians. Some of them nowadays don't even understand how fucking Wi-Fi works.
Mr. Chu, does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
What the fuck? Like, could you imagine trying to explain to however old Mitch McConnell how AI works? By the time he finished, he'll probably have decomposed into dust. In fact, by the time he finished, half of Congress would have decomposed into dust because for whatever reason, we just decided to put the oldest people imaginable in charge of our country so much that at any given moment, half of them could curl up and die because they've been there for 30 fucking years, because they've been promising to do the same thing for 30 years, but they never fix it, because if they fix it, they're not going to have anything to run their campaign on for the next re-election cycle because they fixed that problem. What are they going to do now? Come up with a different... No, they can't come up with a different problem. That's too complicated. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they're gonna do it until they die. Anyways.
Almost lost my cool there.
What Congress does is hand the actual work over to the agencies. They say, EPA, we made this law that says don't pollute. We need you to figure out what pollute actually means. And that, dear viewer, that tiny detail is what has fundamentally transformed lobbying. Because convincing half the members of Congress to vote on a bill is very hard, because not only do you have to convince that many people, but that vote is also public. It's on C-SPAN. You get yelled at on Twitter for doing it. But convincing one guy named Gary in his cubicle at the EPA to change a definition, that's easy. Nobody's watching Gary. Gary's lonely. Gary would love to have lunch with you so you can help his understanding. You see, modern lobbying isn't about buying votes. It's about rewriting the dictionary. And this is called regulatory capture. It's when the guard dog starts taking treats from the home invader. Let's say you're a bank and you want to make some creative decisions with grandma's pension. You don't want Congress to openly repeal the law that says you can't gamble with grandma's pension, because that would make headlines and people would probably get angry. Instead, you go to the regulator and you say, hey, let's reclassify high-risk gambling as strategic asset management. Because the law stays the same, nothing actually changed with the law, but now that law functions in a completely different way. So now you can do whatever you want with grandma's pension. And the best part about it is that whole process was completely under the radar, unless someone was looking really closely. But that's who has that kind of time. But you're probably thinking, why would a regulator even help them do that? Well, it's because half the time, the people writing the rules used to work for the companies that they were regulating, or even better, they plan to work for them next year. And this is called the revolving door. Let's say you work at the FDA approving drugs for 5 years on a government salary, and then all of a sudden Pfizer walks in and they say, hey, we want to give you a job, but we can't do it for a whole nother year. Now, do you think you're gonna be tough on Pfizer while you're polishing your resume for them? Fuck no. You're gonna do enough glazing to put Vernon Rudolph to shame. And this wasn't as big of an issue before, because previously the people doing our regulating, our congressmen, they could actually be voted out because, we're the ones who put them there. But these new regulators, we didn't put them there. They got appointed to those positions. So if they're doing a terrible job and screwing us over, there's not much we can do directly about it. We just have to go to our congressmen and tell them to do something about it. And how well do you think our congressmen listen to us?
Sir? Sir, are you listening to me, sir? Sir, I'm talking to you!
Yeah, that's what I thought. By the 1970s, corporations had figured this out. You don't need to bribe Congress to kill a law. You just let them pass it and then go to the regulator responsible for it and lobby them to make the conditions so complicated or the deadline so far away that effectively that law doesn't even get put into practice. It's efficient, it's quiet, and it's completely legal. But eventually, the public started to catch on. They realized that some shady stuff was going on, so in the 1970s after Watergate, America decided to turn the lights on. But that's when we realized that sometimes when you turn the lights on, all it does is show the roaches exactly where the crumbs are. After Nixon's little mishap, America collectively lost its mind. Trust in the government hit rock bottom, and the public demanded change. Specifically, they demanded transparency. They wanted to be able to shine a light on the government's dealings, so Congress passed a series of reforms known as the Sunshine Laws. And this idea was good in theory. Open the doors, no more secret meetings, no more smoke-filled rooms where guys with cigars decided the fate of the economy. Everything has to be public. Every committee vote recorded, and every meeting logged. And this sounds fantastic, right? We, the people, can finally hold our politicians accountable.
You serious?
Oh, how naive. Have you learned nothing yet? Anytime the government touches something, they manage to fuck it 7 ways to Sunday. Here's what actually happened. Before the Sunshine Laws, if a lobbyist paid a congressman to vote yes on a bill, that vote usually happened in a closed session. So the lobbyist couldn't actually see if that guy voted yes. The congressman could take whatever the lobbyist gave him, vote no to help his constituents, and then just lie to the lobbyist later. But now, every single vote was recorded. So the lobbyist knew instantly if their guy voted the right way or not.
Gotcha, bitch!
Transparency didn't empower the voters. Most voters don't have time to watch C-SPAN for 6 hours a day. But you know who does? The guy getting paid $500 an hour to make sure that the senator they promised a job to stays in line. This transparency allowed special interests to monitor their investment. So if a congressman took a donation and didn't deliver the vote, a lobbyist would know immediately and could cut off the funding. Think of it like a vending machine. Before the 70s, Congress was like a black box. Put your dollar in, you hit A4, and you hope a Snickers bar comes out. Sometimes it did, sometimes it ate your money, but there's nothing you could do about it. But the Sunshine Laws put a glass front on the machine, so now when I put my dollar in and it gets stuck on a coil, I can see exactly what happened. And more importantly, I know exactly where and how hard to kick the machine to get what I paid for. The Sunshine Laws turned legislation into a transaction that could be monitored, and the results speak for themselves. Between 1968 and 1978, the number of corporations with public affairs offices in DC grew by 5 times. And the number of firms with registered lobbyists went from 175 in 1971 to over 2,400 by 1982. So this didn't kill the industry. This made it explode harder than a teenager who just discovered how to turn off parental controls. Because it gave them a roadmap. We showed them where to stand, who to talk to, and how to verify that they got what they paid for. It's like trying to stop people from counting cards in blackjack by having the dealer announce the count after every hand. You thought transparency would keep the game honest, but instead you just did the math for everyone trying to beat the house. Now let's jump to 2010, the year Iron Man 2 came out and the year the Supreme Court decided to make a decision that would take political spending numbers and send them to the stratosphere. It all started with a conservative nonprofit called Citizens United. In 2008, during the Democratic primaries, they made a 90-minute documentary titled Hillary the Movie. And spoiler alert, this was not a flattering biopic. It was basically an hour and a half of people going over why they thought Hillary Clinton would be a disaster for America.
Government of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Now, Citizens United wanted to pay to have this air right before the election, but the Federal Election Commission stepped in and said absolutely not.
How about no?
They said that because Citizens United was a corporation, under the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, corporations were banned from spending money on electioneering communications right before a vote. So Citizens United tried to fight back and say that this should be protected by free speech. To which the FEC said, yeah, free speech applies to people, and the closest thing you have to a person is a tax ID number. So Citizens United decided to do the rational thing and take the movie down and respect the decision made by the FEC. I'm just kidding. They decided to sue the federal government. And this case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now you'd think this would be pretty cut and dry, but during the arguments, the government lawyer revealed something. Under questioning, he revealed that hypothetically, if the government could ban this movie for electioneering communications, then technically they could ban a book if it was published by a corporation and contained a single line endorsing a candidate under this same reasoning. The Supreme Court justices realized that if they're able to decide who gets to speak about politics, that they can basically rig the conversation in their favor. And this goes against pretty much everything we stand for. Now that's taking it a little to the extreme, but in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United favor. They ruled that political spending is a form of protected speech. Their logic was that corporations are just groups of people, and people have the right to free speech. And in the modern world, you need money to be heard, to buy ads, to buy flyers, to buy billboards, to buy whatever, to air documentaries. Therefore, if the government limits how much money you can spend on that kind of stuff, then they're technically censoring your speech. And as you can see, the intention behind this ruling was good, but if we learned anything from the Sunshine Laws, it's that if you give corporations an inch, they won't only take a mile, they'll buy that mile, and then they'll charge you to stand on it.
What is this? You're making me pay you to stand at the cash register?
Now, to be clear, Citizens United did not make it legal to donate directly to a candidate. If Amazon writes $1 million check to a senator's campaign account, that senator is still in a world of shit. But the court ruled that as long as that spending is independent, meaning that it's not coordinated with the candidate, then the spending can't be limited. Now, let's pause for a second. Just to make it clear how big of a change this is, let me present you with a hypothetical. Let's say a large tech company wants some favorable laws passed so they can build a new facility in Texas. The easiest way to go about this would be to get a senator in their pocket to create a good environment for them. Now, typically, this tech company could only incentivize this senator with a very limited amount of money to their campaign account, among other things. But now, they could very easily go to whoever the current senator is and say, hey, if you help me out during your next re-election campaign, I'm going to take that boatload of money over there and say a bunch of nice things about you. But if you don't, imagine what it could do for the other side.
So we can take them to a nice, comfortable place below deck and, they can't refuse because of the implication.
Okay. You had me going there for the first part. The second half kind of threw me.
Do you realize how crazy this is? It's the political equivalent of a large, bald Russian man who definitely isn't mob affiliated, walking into your store and looking around and being like, nice place you have here. Be ashamed if caught fire. Good thing I know someone you can pay to prevent it. He isn't threatening you, he's just making an independent observation about fire safety. But despite that, you still know exactly what to do if you don't want your store to mysteriously burn down. Now that whole idea around independent spending is the whole premise behind a super PAC. A regular PAC? Now that has limits. A regular PAC has strict limits because they usually donate directly to someone's political campaign. But a super PAC? It's like if you took Mary Poppins' bottomless bag, but the only thing that came out of it was anonymously donated $100 bills. And as long as they don't officially coordinate with the campaign, they can spend as much money as they like from whomever they want. And the numbers speak for themselves. In 2008, independent expenditures during elections totaled around 144 million. By 2012, just 2 years after the ruling, independent expenditures jumped to over $1 billion. But the lobbyists realized they had one more problem. Contrary to what I said earlier, super PACs do have to disclose their donors. So if nefarious oil company A spends $10 million supporting a candidate, people might get upset at that candidate because clearly this company doesn't have the best interests of the public in mind. So to fix this, lawyers figured out that they could use social welfare nonprofits called 501c4s to act as an intermediary. Because guess what? These nonprofits don't have to disclose their donors.
That could be a problem.
So now you just donate to the Totally Not a Money Funnel nonprofit, and then the Totally Not a Money Funnel nonprofit takes that money and gives it to the super PAC. And if anyone got curious, they could look at the super PAC and trace the money back to that nonprofit, but before that, they have no idea where that money came from. Now, if you've ever watched Ozark or Breaking Bad, you might notice a little pattern here. This sounds a little bit like money laundering, and that's because it is money laundering.
You're goddamn right.
And while this isn't explicitly money laundering, the basic concept is pretty much the same. Let me explain. In the criminal world, you take dirty money from, let's say, unlicensed pharmaceuticals, and you funnel that money through a legitimate business like a car wash. So now to the government, it looks like all that money you made from your independent activities was legitimately made at this car wash. And this is the same thing, just in reverse. You take clean corporate money, funnel it through a social welfare nonprofit to scrub the name off the check, and then dump that money into a super PAC. So when that super PAC spends $10 million telling your district that Senator Bob is the second coming of George Washington, nobody knows it was actually paid for by the same company that good old Senator Bob just gave a huge tax break to. It is literally reverse money laundering, but instead of you hiding the money from the government, it's the government hiding money from you. And as you'd expect, this fundamentally changed lobbying. Before 2010, a lobbyist's power came from what he could offer to someone. After 2010, it came from the threat. Now, when a lobbyist walks into a congressman's office, he doesn't have to say a word. That congressman knows that if he votes the wrong way, that lobbyist can unleash a $20 million super PAC Death Star that will blot out the sun with negative attack ads. So now lobbyists don't even have to buy politicians. They can just threaten to end them. Alright, now let's put it all together. Imagine you're an airline manufacturer and your biggest competitor just came out with a new plane that's way more fuel efficient than anything you have. Now, due to this, you start losing money and you need to release a new plane yesterday. But there's a small problem when it comes to rapidly developing a new plane: the FAA. The FAA has to certify every inch of your new plane to make sure that it, doesn't fall out the friggin' sky. And this process takes months, if not years, which is time that you do not have. So how do you fix this? Do you bribe Congress? No, that's illegal. Do you hire a lobbyist? Maybe, but then you'd have to register that and people might know what you're up to. Instead, we're gonna take a slightly different approach. Step 1, you hire a former senator, but you don't hire him as a lobbyist. You hire him as a strategic advisor, because he doesn't lobby Congress, he just educates them on anything aviation related. He makes phone calls, he sets up dinners, but he never technically asks for a vote on anything, so he never has to register, because his principal purpose is that of an advisor, not of a lobbyist. That takes us to step 2. You create a fake citizens group, and we'll call it Americans for Affordable Travel, because who doesn't love affordable travel? Now what you do is you fund this group with $10 million that were funneled through a nonprofit, so that way nobody knows it came from you. Then they run ads saying things like, "The FAA is raising ticket prices by introducing unnecessary red tape. Tell Congress to stop it." So now it's not you asking for deregulation, it's the people. That takes us to step 3, where you go to the FAA and you tell them, "Look, we know you guys are underfunded and overworked. How about you let us inspect our own planes? We have the best engineers, and we care about safety more than anyone."
Right.
And because half the guys working at the FAA eventually want to end up working for you, they say, "Why, that's an amazing idea. Why didn't we think of that?" So now you just slash through all that FAA red tape and you can push this plane through production, because guess what? Now you're the FAA inspector. Now let's jump back to reality. I didn't use that example just for no reason. I used it because, believe it or not, that is Boeing's exact business model. Well, not exactly, but I'm not far off. Boeing and the airline industry overall spent years lobbying, not just for laws, but for the process. They convinced the government to adopt a program called Organization Designation Authorization. And these are just fancy words for manufacturer employees will act as FAA inspectors for manufacturer planes. This is literally like a teacher letting their students grade their own final exams. Sure, most of the students are probably going to be honest because the consequences are pretty severe, but if you have a student that's already failing the class and he needs an A to make sure that he doesn't get kicked out of school, I'd bet you my left kidney that he doesn't get any grade lower than a B. So when Airbus launched the A320neo that was better than anything Boeing had to offer, all of a sudden Boeing became that kid who needed to pass the test. Because otherwise they're not only going to fail the class, they're going to go out of business. So because of this, they rushed to develop the 737 MAX as a response. But the engineers for it discovered a little design quirk. To make the engines more fuel efficient, they had to make them huge, and to fit them on the wings, they had to push them forward. And the result? The plane naturally wanted to do a wheelie and stall out. And I may not be a rocket scientist, but I sure as shit know that if anything other than God's greatest gift to mankind, the F-15 Eagle, goes straight fucking vertical, that it's probably gonna come back down and not get back up. So to fix this, they added a secret piece of software called MCAS that was supposed to automatically push the nose down if it felt the plane pulling up. Now, if they went and told the FAA that this was a new system, the pilots would then need additional expensive training, and this would make the project delayed, which would cost Boeing time that they did not have. So instead, they decided to classify this as a minor background system. It wasn't even mentioned in the flight manuals. And the FAA signed off on that. Why? Because if you remember from before, Boeing was acting as its own FAA inspectors. So the guy signing the paper, giving it the okay, just so happens to be getting his paycheck from the same guy that handed him the paper. And the result of this? 2 planes fell out of the sky and 346 people died because of it. And this didn't just happen because of a bad sensor. This was the result of Boeing and the airline industry's lobbyists spending decades convincing the government that they didn't need any babysitters. But the worst part of all this? Nobody went to jail because technically speaking, nothing was illegal. They followed the regulations perfectly, regulations that they just so happened to help write to ensure that they were able to maximize shareholder value at the expense of our safety. Okay, that was a lot, but where does that leave us now? If you remember, we started this journey with a peasant just wanting to tell the king to fix a pothole without getting his head put on a spike. But we ended up in a world where a corporation can write a check, not only bypass safety inspectors, but become them, and turn a commercial airliner into a laundar, all the government doesn't just sit by and watch, but actively enabled them to do so in the first place. And if you're sitting there feeling like the game is rigged, that's because it is. Because the United States government has become the ultimate pay-to-win server. Because sure, it's free to vote. Sure, it's free to call your representative. Sure, it's free to write a petition. But that's not going to do nearly as much as when a billion-dollar company walks in and big dicks its way into your representative's office. And when we try to complain to Congress about it, they're just going to sit there and say, hey man, it's just free speech. They just happen to be speaking way louder right now. You see, the founding fathers built a house where everyone had a seat at the table. But over the last 200 years, we've let the owners of that table turn it into a VIP club where the cover charge is a 7-figure donation to a super PAC. But does this make lobbying inherently evil? No. If the government decides to ban the sale of energy drinks because they think caffeine gives kids autism, you better bet your ass that I want Red Bull to be able to walk in there and tell them why that's the stupidest thing since screen doors on submarines. Because we do need experts to be able to tell politicians when they're being idiots. But there's a massive difference between educating the government and influencing the government. There's a difference between redress of grievances and regulatory capture. One is democracy, and the other is just bribery with extra steps.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps.
So what's the solution? To be honest, I don't know. I'm just an idiot with unfettered access to the internet. But I do know that the first step to fixing a problem is recognizing you have one. And America has a spending addiction, and right now the bill is being paid with your tax dollars and your safety. So all I'll say is keep your head on a swivel, watch where the money goes, and for the love of God, stop voting for politicians who are sponsored by the very companies that they claim to be fighting. Thank you for watching. The best way to support the channel and to lobby me to make more videos is to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Peace. Note to future self, when you edit this, maybe make sure to blur your face during the whole Boeing part. I don't need to end up with 2 self-inflicted GSWs to the back of the head.